As the drummer for the popular rock group Police, I have played the great stages of the world before all kinds of audiences. This was the first time I ever had to play dinner music to a bunch of lions. The theory was that the lions, being complete Philistines, would hate the sound of my music and would therefore not eat the musician. I'm Stewart Copeland in the safer confines of my studio here in England, which I left to go to Africa to record the concept of rhythmatism, which is a study of the patterns that weave the fabric of life. And where else to study these patterns but in Africa? The Giriama tribesmen in Kenya still use their drums for communication as well as entertainment. We were equipped with portable digital recording equipment to capture 4/4 rhythms that are the basis for all the modern music that we dance to. And so in this way I was able to lift the African sounds and turn them into my own melodies. The Giriama had very complex rhythms. It was very difficult intellectually to analyze them, but as soon as I sat down and played with them, my hands seemed to figure out what to do for themselves. When I got home, I was able to add a few sounds of my own. The obvious move for somebody in a big group tends to be to make another big record and continue making pop music. That seems to be what everyone does, but this was a sidestep. There's a lot of difference in the way I conduct myself as a pop star and the way I conduct myself as an anthropologist. We crossed the African continent from the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic side, zigzagging back and forth across the equator. Filming in Africa is very different. We slept anywhere we found ourselves and traveled by any means that we could find. In the high central plains of Kenya, the Kambas were celebrating with a lion mating dance. And as a drummer, I didn't actually pick up any licks, but the overall musical experience to go back and find the roots of our music, the tempo and the blue notes, was really what it was all about. The bottle cap necklaces were also something new to me. In some cases, we could hear the music before we could locate the source. The dry, dusty wind in northern Kenya carried the friendly sounds of cattle bells. This is where the Samburu live, in the fourth world. Samburu boys, ages 16 to 21, are relieved of their pastoral duties to serve as Morans, the official warriors of the tribe. Their rhythmic jumping is less a dance and more of an acquired skill for looking over the tall grasses to spot their cattle and any predators that might be stalking them. Of all the samples that I made, the Samburu samples and the Maasai samples were the most usable. A lot of the music in this film is created with the technique called sampling, which is to record a 1 second or one syllable of a piece of music, one beat of a drum, one pluck of a string. And with the Samburu, who are the last tribe you heard, I can take one vocal bit, like... That's just one little section of what he's doing there, and I can play a melody on it. I can play a different place on the keyboard, or for instance, this one here. Woo. And sequence it in the machine. Brilliant, isn't it? Humans were not not the only source of our musical inspiration. Our plan was to incorporate a variety of sounds from the African landscape. I spent 3 wonderful days riding with the giraffes. It felt like when you're in a tiny craft riding along in the water right next to the Queen Mary. It's almost like you're in slow motion because this big, huge thing, and you don't really get a feeling of how big they are and how they move unless you're right up next to them. The thing towers above you as it runs in slow motion. The local Maasai chief was not very interested in our musical investigation, but was fascinated by our musical toys. In less than 2 minutes, a Maasai herdsman was able to produce music on our miniature synthesizer. The notes that they hit, the melodies, are what we call the blue notes, which distinguish blues and jazz and so on from European music. The Rhythmatist soundtrack was finally coming together in the shadow of Kilimanjaro. The closer we came to the Atlantic side of the continent, the more local pop music illustrated how African music has come full circle. The original rhythms and melodies, which developed into the blues, salsa, and eventually reggae, have returned to their ancestral grounds in new shapes and on new instruments. This Congolese pop music is called Lingala, and it's played everywhere, from this disco in Zaire to the Kinshasa jail, where I was detained one night for a small visa infraction. The vast Serengeti Plain, south of Lake Victoria, and the cradle of our species. This huge wild area is steadily shrinking because of the advances of people and the spreading desert. We came here to find rock outcroppings which anthropologists believe to be ancient meteorites. When the natives discovered the resonant properties of these huge boulders, they banged religiously on them with any heavy objects they could find. After generations of this, they left indentations on the rocks which produced different tones. Like the other sounds we collected in Africa, we isolated the rock sounds and fed them into the computer. By adding melodies and a few sounds of my own, I was able to produce the final movement of our African soundtrack, The Rhythmatist.